Hi, my name is Reka, and I'm going for the longest title from all of the talks award today, so do vote. So yeah, today I'll be talking, it's not a very technical talk, and I'll make a disclaimer in a moment as well, but it's really focusing on the data that go into these models that you all work with, and the possible biases in there. So I wanted to just introduce myself and say who I am and where I'm coming from, because I'm definitely not the sort of traditional data science kind of person. So my title is Lecturer in Quantitative Methods. I'm based in the Center of Criminology, previously in the School of Law. I know nothing about law. Now School of Social Science, a bit more familiar with that one. But what do I actually do? Essentially, according to my colleagues, I'm just a huge nerd that works with data. So that is my, I think, my qualification possibly for being here. But I come from a social science background, and I'm very much interested in people and what people do, where they go, what they think, and how they perceive the places and the experiences that they encounter in their everyday lives. And I'm particularly interested in sort of using new forms of data to do this. And I've put new into brackets because it's new. It's not that new, but it's new for social science. So what do we normally do in social sciences if we want to find out what people do and what they think and where they go? We ask them, right? So we build a survey and we ask them some questions and so on. But there are some methodological issues that surround data collected in this way. So one of them is to do with recall, the extent to which people can remember their experiences. And this is specifically true for sort of more emotional experiences. So people find it hard to recollect emotions past pretty much like 2 weeks. Another issue with this is the kind of interviewer bias. So people tend to want others to perceive them favorably. So if I'm asking you questions about things like your criminality or your fear of crime or perception of police, these sorts of things, you might not give me the complete honest answer. And finally, something that's interesting for me is the sort of spatial resolution that we can extract from these kinds of data. So I do a lot of mapping and geographical analysis. And when you ask people about for example, their perception of safety in their neighborhood, what we tend to do is we then aggregate many people's responses to that neighborhood and have some map of this neighborhood is kind of scary, this one's super safe, this one's a little bit more scary, that sort of thing. And it's not very granular, it's kind of a high level overview. So the type of data that I then instead turn to is crowdsourced data. So crowdsourcing, this term coined by Jeff Howe in 2005, it refers to harnessing large amounts of information from people, from many individual people that come together into this large collaborative project. So I think the easiest example of that is Wikipedia. So who's ever been on Wikipedia? Okay. Who's contributed to Wikipedia? Who's contributed to an article? Okay, so quite a lot of hands in this room. I'm going to go ahead and say this is a biased sample, but fewer than have visited Wikipedia, so keep that one in mind. So specifically, as mentioned earlier, I'm interested in sort of bad things about people. So before becoming an academic, I used to be a crime analyst and working in London, looking at all the ways that you can be a victim of crime. You can die, be seriously injured while traveling around London. So I'm interested in bad things. But that's a different story. So for crowdsourced data, I wanted to look at what people don't like about their environments, right? So if you're walking around your neighborhood, what is it that annoys you? What is something that you want to report? And in the UK, we have this website called fixmystreet.com. Where you can go type in your postcode and report potholes, mostly potholes is what people report, but report anything that bothers you in your local area. And I think that there are other countries have their own versions of this, so if you're interested in where the potholes are in your area, look for this equivalent. So what does this look like? So this is sort of near my home. I promise this report was not just me for effect. Somebody has actually reported this. So you go walk on your route to work or wherever it is, you find the problem that you're interested in, and you report it, right? So we get a sort of location information, you get a picture, you get a title, you get a time of reporting. Ooh, I'm gonna try and use this thing. Yeah. So you get time of reporting, you get whether a person left their name, in this case this person was anonymous, and all of this. Lovely information portrayed for everyone to see. And lucky for me, these reports are stored in a way that what this report is, fix my street / report 1234, the next one's 1235, 1236, and so on, so I could get them all. It was fun. So I was living in London at the time, so I grabbed 55,000 entries of Fix My Street in London. Great stuff. Most of them looked like this. So as I said, potholes, cracked pavement, this sort of thing. This is what people are most annoyed about. As an aside, I started off visiting sort of local community neighborhood watch policing areas, and they told me the most important residential crime problem is dog fouling. So just saying, London's pretty safe, guys. So lucky for me, actually, about 30% were what is called incivilities. So incivilities or environmental antisocial behavior are things like graffiti, litter, abandoned vehicles, the sort of more serious of these environmental issues. So I wanted to have a look at when people are reporting these, what are they reporting, and find out about the people. But when you're working with crowdsourced data, you don't really have a say in what sort of variables we're collecting information about, right? And so I would really have loved to look into demographics of who reports what sort of thing. But people didn't really fill that out. They just wanted their problem solved. But what some people did do is leave their name with these data, right? So I thought, oh, that's really exciting. What can we do with a name? Actually, we can do quite a bit, right? So with a first name, we can infer gender really quite well. There's some exceptions. So Sam is a name that we're pretty much 50-50 on. But for most first names, we're pretty good at inferring gender. Age as well. There's trends in naming babies. I think there's the famous baby names data set that we used to practice plotting and so on. And from the surname, you can infer ethnicity. So this is really quite exciting. And I used this to have a look at who was reporting what. So looking at gender, firstly, looking at names, we find that 2/3 of the reports are made anonymously, right? So people are not really wanting to leave their names with most reports. About 1/4 are male names, and about 8%, 8.5% are female. So there's two possible explanations for this. One, men report more, which we tend to find in crowdsourced data anyway. Or maybe women just report more anonymously, right? So maybe they're less likely to leave their name. So this was quite interesting, and I wanted to look at also what do different people report more. So men report potholes and pavement and road issues, right? Just anything to do with the road is much more reported, or more likely to be reported by men. On the other hand, women are more likely to report litter, dog fouling, parks, things about public toilets and dead animals. So much more the sort of walking-related things. But very interestingly, for me, the more sort of serious, so as I said, the environmental antisocial behavior, things like graffiti and abandoned vehicles that are associated with this kind of low-level offending and kind of dodginess of your area, are more likely to be reported anonymously. So this is very interesting because already when people are reporting something that they think, oh, this might have some repercussion, they're not leaving their name. So there's a bit of almost security consciousness on this platform, which I'll return to later, which I thought was kind of fun. The other thing I wanted to look at is the extent to which people reporting on Fix My Street are guardians of their neighborhood. So I mentioned surveys in the beginning, and when you ask people with a survey, you would say, if there's some kids graffitiing in your neighborhood, would you intervene, right? And then we would say, in this neighborhood, there's 10% of people would intervene or something like that. And I wanted to explore to what extent people stick to their neighborhood when reporting. So I mapped, there's a lot of prolific reporters in this data set. So I mapped some of the prolific reporters and see whereabouts they reported. So usually we define neighborhood as some sort of small unit geography, so census geography, for example. So each one of these shapes there is one, it's called a lower superapple area, one of the UK census geographies. And you can see this person covers quite a lot of them, right? So they have some hotspots, probably where they live, where they work, where their partner lives, but generally they also report in areas between that. So we can see they're guardians of more than just one small neighborhood. And this really varies. So I created these typologies of different sort of reporters. You can see this person probably also does it when they're on holiday or going to a conference or something like that, because they have a really sort of wide spatial range of reporting. So this is getting really exciting, right? A really granular spatial resolution of where people are encountering these problems. So let's map at point level. If anyone's familiar with London, that's King's Cross and Pancras, really lighting up. There's lots of problems. And we can split it down by the different type of things people are reporting. So again, litter is concentrated around this busy train station, dog fouling in the residential areas. And then something happens. So abandoned vehicles up there is concentrating in Covent Garden. So I don't know if people are familiar with what Covent Garden looks like, but it looks like this. So it's super pedestrianized, lots of cafes, lots of walking, whereas abandoned vehicles, they look like this, right? So it's usually when teenagers hotwire a car and they go joyriding and then they dump it somewhere. So how was abandoned vehicle hotspot showing up in Covent Garden? This is when, let's have a look at this data and what's actually in there. Well, this is what people were reporting as abandoned vehicle. And technically, you know what? It gets you from point A to point B, and it's a vehicle, and someone's left it there, and it's abandoned and okay. But I think by the Home Office definitions, this is fly parking or fly tipping. So this was a very important sort of learning point for me. To really keep in mind what these crowdsourced data actually represent. Because the people, these questions are not pilot tested, it's not a survey, so people might understand the data to be slightly different. So there's specific issues associated with these kinds of crowdsourced data sets, and a lot of them come from the mode of production of these data, right? And I think one of the most obvious ones, which you're probably thinking already, is that it's generated by these sort of very involved and interested citizens, right? So people who self-select to participate and to share information through these kinds of projects, and so it's not necessarily in fact, it's definitely not a representative sample of the population that we might be interested in. The other thing is this Pareto principle, also called 80-20 rule, which we observe in social patterns often. So relating to crime, it's usually 20% of addresses account for 80% of calls to police, these sorts of things. Or you might have heard of the 1% rule of the internet, right? But I mentioned Wikipedia at the beginning. And I really like this because it's so interesting. So 99.8% of people who visit Wikipedia, they just go and they read whatever's on there. 0.2% of people are occasional contributors, and they contribute to the odd article. And it's 0.0003% that contribute the majority of the content of Wikipedia. That is amazing. And the same holds for a lot of crowdsourcing data. So I had a look at the contribution of people to Fix My Street, specifically in my data set. And I used a Lorenz curve. So this is something they use in economics to map income inequality. And I used it to map this sort of participation inequality. So you can see it's a straight line there. If it was a complete straight line up there, then each one person would contribute the equal amount. But what we see is basically it's a straight line up to here, which means that each one person contributes just one report. Then it kinks a little bit, and then these people all contribute 2 reports. And then you see this very huge spike, which means this top small percent of people, they have contributed the majority of reports for the Fix My Street data. So we're really hearing disproportionately from different people. And it's not random either who participates in these. And there's lots of research around who tends to be more active in crowdsourcing projects. In the UK, we have this thing called the index of multiple deprivation, where the neighborhoods are ranked from sort of most deprived to least deprived. And so I plotted that against the number of Fix My Street reports in each neighborhood. And you can see areas that score higher on this deprivation score are less active in this kind of Fix My Street platform. So that doesn't necessarily mean there's fewer things to report. It might just mean that there's less engagement with these sorts of tools. There's also a range of ethical considerations, but I think that could be a whole different talk in itself. But some points I wanted to highlight are questions around privacy and surveillance. So I mentioned how when people were reporting things that they thought maybe might have a repercussion, so something like graffiti, they reported it anonymously, right? So possibly some of those people might have had an expectation that their name might be used for something, but possibly nobody thought that some data nerd was going to go and scrape all their reports and map where they're actively plotting all the potholes in their area. So I can sort of surveil these people without their knowledge, and this brings also to the data linkage, right? What else can I link the name data with, where I might get a bit more insight into people's activities than they would like. Data ownership is another interesting point. So this I did with the consent of My Society, who's the NGO who run Fix My Street, but again, I could have easily just scraped the data without speaking to anyone. And then the implications of the findings. So this kind of, if we were to task street cleaning, for example, based on these data, we might be giving preference to people who shout the loudest and who participate in these kinds of activities more than actually where there is the most rubbish or something like that. So just quickly, some possible solutions. I mean, this is not a new problem, right? The debiasing samples. So maybe there's something around weighting, so like survey weights, for example, that we could consider. I'm working with a PhD student looking at small area estimation, where you borrow strength from auxiliary areas to kind of supplement information. Or also there might be creative ways to make use of these biases, right? Is there something that might be meaningful in the bias that we can extrapolate more information from? And that's why I wanted to present this to the smart data science audience, of maybe if someone's interested in these kinds of data, I think making them more useful or less biased is an area that would be really exciting to learn more about. Yeah, that's me done, out of time.
Thank you, Reka. Do we have some questions?
Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering if you're developing all this strategy of doing this data analysis, you could probably also apply it to other type of data. Have you thought about it, like in different applications to which you can apply the same strategy, because it seems to be something that you can apply systematically?
Yeah, so the really exciting, so you mean using crowdsourced data to get insight about people's activities in different domains. Yeah, it's really exciting for things that are otherwise difficult to measure, difficult to capture. So I work quite a bit with police, and I work with police data. And for some things, police data is fantastic. So burglary or motor vehicle theft, everybody reports that because you need the crime number to get the insurance. But other things like sexual harassment, nobody really wants to talk about that, or nobody wants to go through the hassle of reporting that to the police. But there are crowdsourced platforms where people are collecting their stories of sexual harassment, just for letting it out and so on. And by, again, scraping that kind of data and getting that insight of what people are reporting, you can build a much better picture of what are the elements of an environment that make this crime possible to happen, for example. And by unpacking that and getting this new insight, you can complement what we know from sort of more official data sources and try and learn that way. So it's my approach is very much driven by the what do we not know enough about from these official sources, and then what else can we apply it to? But there's loads of, there's applications for sexual harassment. There's one of my PhD students now came to me with this map of the Russian darknet market. So people who drop off drugs, they have a crowdsourced map of like where is good to drop off and where is their police presence, and where apparently what is called seagulls, who are people who just go and go treasure hunting. So I'm working on that, but hopefully, don't share that too widely. I don't want some surprise in the post or anything like that. But yeah, there's lots of applications, which is really exciting.
In terms of debiasing, Boston had a program kind of like this for street issues, and found that they were getting only sort of the streets traveled by the wealthiest people. And so they gave the app to all the city employees, which gave you a different demographic. But I'm also wondering, you could potentially outfit buses, cabs, all sorts of things for sort of passive gathering of data on the street conditions, which might also help.
Yeah, definitely. There's a project in Uganda that's sort of crowdsourcing air quality monitors, and they had the same problem. They were monitoring certain areas, but then what they did is there's these moped taxis. So they attached the sensors to the moped taxis, which worked really well in terms of coverage. But the moped taxis have a particular type of pollution as well that they emit. So it introduced a whole different kind of bias that way. But definitely, if you make use of if you make data collection easier as well, then you can enroll people who are doing other jobs and covering the city for these other jobs and doing that way. I think it was somewhere in the US that developed an app that mapped potholes based on bumps. So it was an accelerometer or something like that. But, all right, okay. So yeah, you could just give that to anyone because they don't have to take time out of their workday to actively monitor that. So that's definitely a solution, yeah.
I'm imagining what would help to incentivize people, so from more representative distribution to report, is if they see feedback, if they see an immediate solution or implementation of some action, immediate action, then they learn that yes, it's worth it.
Yeah, definitely. Feedback is so important in this. Another project that I worked on, I built a mobile app for people to report where they feel safe and unsafe. And I started off with this ambition that I'm going to map everyone's feeling of safety, and how can I get people to do that? And I based it on another app called Mappiness. I don't know if anyone's heard of it, but people were mapping where they feel happy, and you got these charts back at the end of the week of you were happiest on Tuesday, and you got this sort of immediate feedback, which I couldn't quite implement for this is where you felt the most worried in the past week. It didn't quite have the same ring to it, and I didn't get a lot of responses at all. And then I started working with an organization called the Camden LGBT Forum, to map specifically fear of hate crime, which people, again, it's a very underreported thing. But then because I was working with this organization and we would have meetings and reports where people could debrief, and every report they made, we then said, okay, we did this with that report and gave that feedback, I had much better participation in those sorts of events. So you're right, getting that immediate feedback or getting the response of like, you said, this pothole is a problem, then we did this to it, is definitely a way to encourage participation. Yeah.
More questions? Then I have one, if I may. So I think this is a very nice idea with the Fix My City, but is there some communication with also the city council, the government?
Yeah, so Fix My Street, the moment that you make a report, it forwards that report to the relevant local authority through email, and then they respond to it, usually within some time period, depending on how active they are. But there are certain local authorities who've integrated this specific platform to their own website, and that is the biggest driver of participation. So again, that comes back to that legitimacy point of saying, like, look, we are monitoring Fix My Street. If you report something here, we will respond to it. And they have, those local authorities have the highest participation for sure. But for the other ones as well, it gets sent on. And then if you make a report on Fix My Street, they follow up and they ask, oh, did this ever get resolved? And then they put it on their website as if it was fixed or not fixed. So the whole idea, this My Society, they're all about sort of civic technology and civic participation through technology. So they try and make it easier for people to engage with local government. So yeah, definitely they want to get the thing fixed as well as collect a log of all the potholes.
But that's very nice, because then also people have a feeling they're really fixing something and participating, and they get live feedback. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely that feedback is helpful.